All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Brittany, and I'm a second-year BMC student. I've been drawing since I was a tiny child, and something I've always liked to focus on is color, because personally, I find that the use of color is really instrumental in evoking a strong emotional response and this feeling of satisfaction when I look at an image. So I've thought a lot about how I use color in my own drawings, and I hope I can share what I've learned in a way that's helpful to everyone here. But please keep in mind that these are just guidelines that I like to follow, because unless you're aiming for hyperrealism, I don't think there should be like hard and fast rules for color. Like I'm not like an authority on this or like a god. It's just about what looks good to you. So what I'll do is I'll go through how I select a color palette first, and then I'll walk through my painting process, which takes advantage of layer styles and adjustment layers to adhere to my color palette and apply it in a more effective way. And since we're all artists here, I don't think I need to go through basic color theory, but if I need to clarify anything, so please ask some questions in the chat and I'll answer them as best as I can. So before we start, I want to mention that I've been influenced and inspired by the artist Ciro Rolando, also known as Aquasixio. His paintings are really whimsical, and color plays a large part of them. And he has some tutorials online to explain his own color process. His first language, I don't think, is English, so his tutorials might be a bit difficult to understand, but I think they get his message across well enough. So I encourage you guys to check him out. So while I'm creating a palette, I try to keep these three things in mind: balance, cohesion, and accent. So I'll go through all of these one by one, but they all kind of overlap, and I like jump between them when I'm thinking of my color palette. And I think about this throughout my entire color palette selection process, as well as the painting process. Because of this, you shouldn't be afraid to tweak the colors until you think they feel right. And even during mid-painting, like I tweak my colors all the time. And it's really easy to like tweak colors when you're doing digital painting. So I would encourage you guys to take advantage of this. So balance, when I'm thinking about balance, I'm thinking about balance in terms of hue, saturation, and value. So let's start with the simplest, which is value. If your values are limited, your image is going to be difficult to make out. It looks kind of washed out. Some of the details are like you'd have to like squint to make out what's around here, for example. So you should make sure you have a wide and balanced range of light and dark values. So this is like the actual finished painting, and you can see there's like a lot darker areas here, a lot lighter areas here. I'm just gonna, yeah, so make sure that you have a wide range of values. So next, saturation. Saturation is great for grabbing attention, but if something looks super saturated, then the image is kind of gonna look overwhelming. Like this one is pretty saturated. It's really something to look at. But if you have like too little saturation, then the image is gonna look washed out again. So your palette should have a wide and balanced range of saturation. So, oops, this is the final image. You can see that the subject over here is more saturated than the background. And finally, hue. You can vary the value and the saturation of your image, but if there's too much of a single hue, then the color will tend to overpower the image. So we, once again, as you can probably tell, there's a theme here. We want a wide and balanced range of hues. So in this image, there's just like too much green, if you ask me. So I feel like the easiest way to start achieving a wider range of hues is to add a complement, or at least a color close to it. So for example, in here, I added some more red to try to like balance out the green. And then you can also keep adding some more colors to like balance them out. So I thought maybe some like color in between red and green would be nice. So I added a bit of yellow, and like I like how this looks better. There could still be more balancing done in terms of the saturation probably, but once again, tweak things as you go. If you're worried about your new color not fitting in or distracting from your main color, it can be really desaturated. So we don't need to it can be really desaturated. So for example, in this image, you've got like a lot of orange over here, and the shirt actually isn't pure white. If you color pick from it, you can see it's actually blue. So there is a complement here, but the blue is really desaturated. So it balances things out, but it doesn't grab the attention from the orange, which is the main focus. So let's move on to cohesion. The easiest way to maintain cohesion is to stick within a limited color palette. So I know I just said a wide range of hues is good for balance, but you can and should do this with not too many colors, because if you start having too many colors, your palette's going to start fighting within itself for attention. But don't worry, because even with a few main colors, you can still get a wide range to work from. So to do this without breaking cohesion, you can try blending your colors together and then color picking from the results. I use the color picker tool all the time, super useful. So this works really well for color complements, because once you blend them, this is just a simple gradient between these two colors, you get this lovely range of more neutral hues. And they're more desaturated, so these colors here aren't gonna fight the two main colors for attention. And you can keep blending with more colors. So for example, blend these three, you get this gradient, you can get some nice midtones here. And another thing to keep in mind is that right now in this preliminary color palette picking phase, you're just determining the main colors of your scene. So you don't have to worry too much about getting colors to shade with, because later on I'll be using the layer styles to shade while maintaining cohesion. So how should you start picking your limited colors? So of course, objects in your scene have a normal color that you start from. So we've got blue sky, green grass, pretty simple. But when the light isn't just bright white, you'll have to adjust the object's color for this. So for example, it's night here. You can see there's less light, the light's more bluish. So the sky is dark, the sky and grass are darker. They're less saturated and they lean more towards blue. Or when it's sunset, there's the light is more orange, and then suddenly your grass is almost yellowish instead of green. Okay, so if you want to create a palette from scratch though, or you want to introduce new colors to balance things, then it's usually nice to start breaking out those basic color schemes like analogous, complementary, so on. So this is an example of an analogous triad. So you've got the blue from the background, green here, and yellow. And it's usually nice to have a neutral color. So in this case, it would be white here, or really, really pale blue. And this helps bring all the colors together. So here I have the color palette, and I just blended within the color palette. So I would use these colors to start painting. If your analogous triad is really close together, you usually need, I find, a complement of one of the three colors to balance your palette. So the main colors in this photograph, most of it is pretty warm. So we've got your really saturated reds, oranges, yellows. And then over here, just to contrast that, you have more desaturated greens. And then you can also try a double complementary color palette. I use this actually quite a bit, but at this stage, you might start having your palette fight amongst itself. So you want to make sure that some of the colors are pretty desaturated. So there's orange from the flowers, and then this, I just color pick all these from the photo themselves, by the way. This brown is actually just a desaturated and dark red. So you can see that the orange and the blue are complementing each other. But you can also see that there's a really desaturated green in the picture, and that's complementing the really desaturated red. So these are just a few examples to get you started. There's plenty of other color schemes that I don't have time to cover, but you get the idea, hopefully. And finally, keep in mind that maintaining cohesion happens during the painting process itself. So again, the color of the light affects the perceived colors of objects in the scene. So assuming that all the objects are lit by the same source, which is usually the case, this alone helps bring their colors together. So you can even exaggerate this if you want. So let's say I had a yellowish light, you can see these are getting a little bit more orange, yellow. And I think that this one on the right looks more interesting than this one on the left. This one's just kind of gray, and these things look pretty, all three of them look pretty separated. And going off of that, light should be bouncing off of an object, and then that can affect other objects, right? So colors shouldn't be too localized, and you can spread colors around to make the whole thing look more cohesive. It doesn't necessarily have to be realistic if you just want it to look good. So you can see I start spreading around the greens here, the blues here, a bit of pink here, and it makes the whole image look a bit more interesting and cohesive. So once again, I said that you shouldn't have your colors too localized. So for example, this is sticking out like a sore thumb right now because there's no pink or red anywhere else in the scene. It's just yeah, it's just there. So what I usually do is I just color pick from another part of the scene. And so I don't introduce too many like colors that stick out. Even if it's just like slightly off, sometimes it can look weird, but you can't really pinpoint your finger on why. So I like using the color picker for this purpose. And the third thing to think about is accent. So basically which part of the painting you want to emphasize and how you want to emphasize it. So sometimes I start thinking about accent when I start my palette. So for example, when I was planning this piece, I knew I was going to use like this light pink, orangish color for the brain tissue. And I wanted the amoeba to stand out since that's what causes the illness here. So I made it a darker and a saturated green. So other times, most of the color palette is already in place. Then you have to tweak the palette to what you'd like to emphasize. So for this thing, maybe like this actually looks pretty good if like I want it to be like less like in your face. Like you can see that the colors here, none of like, okay, maybe the blue is a little super saturated, but it's generally like a bit more pastel. But let's say I wanted to emphasize the thing in the middle here. So what I did here was I made the green darker. I made the blue shift a bit to work towards green, and then I made the red brighter, more saturated. So this red over here contrasts more from everything else. So it draws your attention more here. So that's what I mean by just like tweaking things as you go along. So our eyes are drawn to areas of high contrast and saturation. So this is part of why we want a wide range of hue, value, and saturation. So we can leverage that to create contrast. So for example, here, I've shown this mushroom picture before, but like these mushrooms are like super high contrast. They're like the only bright thing in this scene. So your attention is drawn to it immediately. And like, let's say if the background was really light, then like you can see right away that a lot of the contrast is gone, like the accent is gone. Your attention isn't drawn as much to the mushrooms anymore. And like the one last thing I have to say about accent is that you have to be careful about using your accent sparingly, because if everything stands out, then nothing stands out. You don't know where to direct your attention anymore. So the take-home messages, when you're choosing your color palette, you keep in mind balance, cohesion, and accent. To maintain balance, you have a wide and balanced range of hue, saturation, and value. To maintain cohesion, you keep your palette limited instead of adding new colors, and you blend within this palette. And you make sure that colors are not too localized within your painting. And finally, design your palette so you can accent parts of your painting through contrast through any combination of hue, saturation, and value. So before I start my demo, I want to go through all the layer styles that I use in my painting. So for shading, I almost always use multiply, but there's a few cases where I want my shadows to be more saturated, and in that case, I use color burn. For highlighting, I use usually overlay. Overlay gives like pretty saturated highlights. Sorry. Screen is better for harsher highlights, such as like on dark things, or like if you want like a really harsh room lighting, but it gives less saturated highlights usually. So I usually only use it for dark areas. And once again, I don't use color dodge that much, but it is really useful for like really, really saturated highlights. So like if something is glowing, for example, then I use color dodge. For color adjustment, I also use overlay layers a lot. Usually when I'm highlighting, I use a lighter color on the overlay layer. If I'm using overlay for color adjustment, then I use a darker color. And I also use the layer style color. I'm not sure if this is only on Photoshop, so it would be nice to know if it's like on other programs. But basically, it completely changes the underlying painting to the color that you paint on top. So it can change color like really drastically if it's on high opacity. But I also use it for subtle adjustments with like a soft brush and on low opacity. And then for adjustment layers, I use hue and saturation like all the time to tweak colors as I go along. The saturation, the lightness, I just kind of tweak them until I feel like they look right. And sometimes I use selective color. You can like target specific colors in your painting and then like shift them towards a different color. So this can be used to adjust your entire color scheme. And then usually once I'm done my painting, I like to apply a curves layer just to like boost the contrast and some of the saturation. It makes your painting look nicer usually, like less washed out, but I usually apply it at the end. So all of these tools that I just went through, they make it really easy to adjust colors on fly. And the initial color palette, which I talked about how to select before, that should just be your starting point, because the chances are that you won't pick the perfect colors right off the bat, right? So luckily, recognizing the color you want is a lot easier than just picking them. So you should keep adjusting the colors as you go along until you're satisfied. Okay, so I'm gonna switch over to Photoshop now. All right. Are there any questions right now, by the way?
Nothing in the chat so far, but just a good reminder for folks, if anything pops up, feel free to type in the chat or unmute. If you type in the chat, you get to hear my sultry voice read your question out. So.
Okay. All right. By the way, when it comes to the paint, like the actual painting demo, I know I have a tendency to go fast. So like, yeah, feel free to interrupt me anytime with questions. So
there is one quick question.
Oh yes, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to call her out because I can. Colleen would like to know who that K-pop star is.
It's Younghoon from 1W. Yeah, I don't really expect many people to know them, but that's okay. I just like the photo. I'm just saying. I'm also a fan of the band, but I also like the photo more. Okay, so for the demo, I've prepared 2 files. So the first one is this one. It's a polished digital painting. I'll be turning the layers on and off so you can see like how they affect things and like demonstrate my process that way. And then afterwards, I'll be like starting, excuse me. Yeah, I'll be starting directly from this sketch, and then I'll be doing something like, whoops. Yeah, doing something like this on the fly. Turn that back on. Anyways, so let's start with a color palette. This is the original photo that I used as reference. So when I saw this photo, I just like really loved the red rim lighting on the hair. So I'm just gonna grab that with a color picker tool right now. Something like this. Yeah, so I really loved that red rim lighting. But I felt like the rest of the image is a little desaturated, so I thought I could make it more interesting. If you color pick from the background and then open up the color picker, you can see that, oopsies. Yeah, you can see that it's like some sort of like pretty dark and desaturated turquoise. So I can shift that a bit more towards like greenish to complement the red and like make it a little bit more saturated, maybe somewhere around there. And then
we had a quick question from Roxy, which was just how do you keep track of your main color swatches in your palette as you're sort of adjusting throughout the process?
Okay, so after I create my like main color palette, I usually like to just keep it in the corner there. And then let's say like in the middle of painting, just use this layer now. Let's say like I wanted to like make it more saturated and like shift it a bit more towards like fuchsia, for example, right? Then I would just color pick from this again and just kind of like paint, whoopsies, paint bucket this just to update it as I go along. I'll be demonstrating something else. Actually, I may as well do it now. And then let's say if I use a color layer, or oh, actually, let me turn this on. Right. Yeah. Let's say I use a color layer just to turn something like, maybe I want something more green. All right, I did that. And then I decide later that like, you know what, I'm going to use hue saturation and like, I think I like this color more. Now this color is not the color that I have selected right now anymore, right? So what I would do is I would switch my layer style to dissolve, because if you zoom in here, you can see that it either gives you like the color or nothing at all. So this pure color is really great for color picking off of, because if you switch it to like normal, say, and then you accidentally color pick from like the edge here, you're not going to get the right color. Like it's a little bit like translucent there. You're going to get the wrong color. So I like to color pick from dissolve layers. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. So yeah. Yeah, so I got my red and the complement of that. And then I also saw that like the color over here is like starting to go more towards orange. It's like crossing red, going more towards orange. And I thought I could like push that a bit more and like introduce a lighter color to my palette if I go towards like really light, bright yellow like this. And I can use that to just like add more accent to like his hair and his face. And it gives me some more skin tones to work with. So I am going to go with that. And then finally, to complement the yellow, I like there's a little bit of purple over here, like bluish purple. So I thought I would make that like the main color of his clothes. I would make it like something like this maybe. Anyways, yeah, so that's the main color palette I would start with. All right, so this is my sketch. Usually I have my sketch on multiply, and so I can paint underneath it. And I usually use like the, if it go from image, adjustments, and then hue saturation here, then I usually like play around with the color of the sketch until I feel like it's a good like shading color to use. Because like as I paint underneath the sketch will darken what's underneath, right? So after I decide the color of my sketch, I like to go with the background first, because like, you know, like the white canvas syndrome, like I get kind of nervous when it's just like pristine white. So I just kind of like fill it in usually with a gradient of the background color. And then I might like add some like extra colors here, extra texture, but like this is really just a starting point. You can go back and tweak it later. Sorry, did someone say something?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
We had a question relevant to what you were just saying that I'm flagging now. It's from Paul Kelly. He missed how did you know the yellow purple pair would work with that red green pair? All
right, let's go back here. So this is like the double complementary color scheme that I was talking about before. So like I already knew that like I started with the red and the green, right? And then I already knew that the yellow would work because there's already some of it in the painting. There's like some yellows here, there's some yellow in the skin tone. And then I also knew that like the purple would work because it's a complement of the yellow. And there also was a little bit in the photo. But I had to make sure that like these two complement colors were desaturated, because these are just kind of like the background, like the supporting actors, so to say. Like the green is mostly in the background, the purple is mostly in the clothes, which you're not supposed to focus on. Like as you can, as you might see from this painting, like the clothes are like a lot more desaturated than the rest of the painting, and they're also a lot rougher. So like it's like, don't look at that, please. Yeah, so I guess that's my thought process in how these colors would work together.
And we had one other question, if it's all right, from
sure.
Riley, who asks, which brushes do you prefer to use in Photoshop? Is there a place to download ones outside of the automatic ones in the app that you recommend?
I've been compiling my brushes for a while. I can like send out like the brushes that I use like in a sort of like after workshop thing in an email, maybe. Would that work?
Yeah, no problem. We can circulate those to the participants.
Sure, yeah. The basic brushes that I use is like one brush like this, where like it's really easy to lay down colors, but there's a tiny bit of like transparency at the end, just so I can blend things a bit if I want. And then I also have like a softer like brush like this, just to blend things. And then a really subtle brush like this, usually just for like really softening things, or like really subtle color adjustments. And then just like a few like basic like texture brushes. Those are like pretty much 99% of what I use. So like, yeah, I'll put that in like a brush pack and then email it later.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, the background. So that's like get rid of the white background, white canvas syndrome, and just like get in there and start painting. But more importantly is that it sets the rest of the colors in context. So let's say if I start with the skin here, if I turn off the background, then like it looks a lot more yellow. But if I turn on the background, because everything here is green, it's like in context, then like the skin starts to look like a little more reddish, like a bit more natural. So like sometimes you won't really know how your colors look like until you put a background on it. So if you put the background at the end, it might be too late. and you might have to tweak things all over again. So that's why I like to start with a background. So after I start with the background, I block in the main colors. Yeah, if you're feeling pretty adventurous, then you can just kind of like start shading like on the first layer itself, which I did a bit of here. But then after that, I usually start going in with my multiply and my overlay layer. So let's start with this. Let's go with the skin as an example. So this layer here is an overlay layer for yellow highlights around the cheek here, jaw, eyes. I'm going to turn it on and off a couple times so you guys can see what I mean. So that's giving me more skin tones to work with and starts like highlighting things. And then I have these highlights here on overlay layers, just like the bright highlights on the nose and the cheek, so on. And after that, I have my multiply layers, or well, my shading layers, sorry. So this is just a multiply layer, just like shading going on it. This one is one of those rare instances where I did use color burn. So you can see like around here, the eyelids, the edge of the jaw. I wanted a bit more of a saturated shadow because it was starting to look kind of like washed out. So I went in with a color burn layer just to like make it darker but more saturated at once. And then there's some like subtle shading here, just like a bit of like skin texture. You can barely see it, but I liked it. And then once I'm done with the shading and the highlighting layers, I like to use a color adjustment layer. So this is just a color layer. And this is the stage where I start spreading the colors around, making them less localized, making the painting more cohesive. So you can see around here, the shading is getting cooler, and that's because I added some green and some purple. There's a bit of purple here as well. So let's see, if I put this on a normal layer, then you guys can see what I mean. Boost saturation.
We had a couple questions come in.
Sure,
One was a comment as well, actually, from Paul. He loves the layer naming. I agree. One question was, how do you decide on the color in the adjustment layers, like the overlay and the color burn?
Okay, let's go back to, okay, I'm just gonna make a new overlay layer. So normally overlay acts as a highlighting layer if you use like a light color. So like here. So like this is gonna act as a highlight. But if I wanna use it as a color adjustment, then I use a more saturated and like a darker color, maybe like mid-tone a little bit like here. Let's say if I want something like a bit more pinkish, which is going to look really out of place in this, by the way, because there's no like fuchsia in this image, but let's go with that anyways. So like I said, when it comes to color adjustment, I like to use a softer, like a really soft airbrush like this, and I just go lightly over, and you can see how that's like slightly changing the color. It really is kind of like practice with it when it comes to like picking colors, but you can also practice just by like, let's say, I'm just gonna plop in like a really bright color. And then what you can do is, instead of just like picking the right color off the bat, you can go to this hue saturation panel and just like fiddle around with the saturation or the lightness or the hue until you feel like it's right, until it's like, and then you can like compare it by like turning the preview on and off. So let's say like this pink is like what I wanted. Then I would just apply that, and then I would turn this into a dissolve layer so that I'm sure to color pick this properly. Because if it's like a normal layer, it's like really subtle, right? And it's like really translucent. I wouldn't be able to get the right color off of this. That's why I use dissolve to color pick. And then after I put it to dissolve and get the right color, then I just turn it back to overlay, and I can use this color now to start like, whoopsies. I can use this color now to start like spreading colors everywhere else. I hope that answered the question.
I think so. And then there was one other question, which was, is there a particular reason you choose to use Photoshop, if you've tried any other programs, and then sort of the benefits that you found for Photoshop and potential recommendations?
Honestly, I just used Photoshop because that's what I had when I started out digital painting, and I just haven't switched to anything else. I've heard that Clip Studio Paint is really good, and I'm pretty sure it has pretty much all the tools that I'm using right now. Someone else who knows about Clip Studio Paint could help me answer that, but like I actually haven't used anything outside of Photoshop.
Thanks.
Okay. Where was I? Oh, right, the color adjustment layer. So this, I just turned this to a normal layer and just like bumped up the saturation so you guys can see what's going on. Like you can see some green here, some purple here, a bit more green, just to like spread the colors around, cool things down. I hope I didn't go too far. Okay, yeah, here we go. Yeah, so if you keep, uh-oh. Here we go. Yeah, so if you look in the edge of the jaw area for here, for example, then you can see that it is getting cooler. It's getting a bit more green or purple. So these color adjustment layers I find like super useful for unifying the image. And you can see that I do something similar for the clothes. This is mostly just purple for now, but I turn on all my color adjust layers and you can see there's a bit of red coming in, some green coming in. It just makes everything look, it just makes everything play nicer together. So this would be my underpainting. And like once you're at this stage, I would say you're like pretty much 80% done, I would say. After this, I like to maybe like hide parts of my sketch with a layer mask that are kind of like getting in the way of the brightest area. So like maybe the chin, the nose. So I'm just going to turn this layer mask back on. And then after that, I just go in with like a normal layer. I'll turn on my detail painting. All these layer heres are just completely normal. And what I do at the end, when I'm pretty satisfied with where my painting is going, I just go in with my regular brush, and then I just start color picking everywhere. Just like start painting like that. Because once you have your underpainting established, you don't want to introduce any more colors. Let's say if I was just like selecting, and then selecting colors, I'm like, oh, it's probably something like this red, and then I start painting with this red. You can see that that kind of stands out. Like it's not that different from the orangey red, but like it looks really weird because that's a completely new color. So that's why I recommend that you just go in with a normal layer and you just color pick from what's already existing when you're doing your detailed painting over top. Let's see, okay. And yeah, so after I've done the detail painting, I start doing like global soft subtle shading just to like shade everything all at once and just bring it all together. So I have some extra shading here. You can see it's pretty subtle, but like I'm starting to use like some purple to like shade everywhere. You can see that I'm adding a bit of purple to the background, so it's not just pure green. Same thing with the highlights. This is where I start adding the rim light. So this like bright white light here, and I started adding a bit more yellow because I felt like the yellow was like a bit too much just in the hair. Sorry. So you can see that I'm starting to add a bit of yellow to the background here too. And then finally, I've got a bit more color adjustment. So like just spreading a bit more yellow. And then finally, I have my adjustment layers. My adjustment layer is mostly just really like this curves layer. So I was talking about curves before, and it's super useful for like boosting saturation and contrast. I had it pretty subtle here, but like if I start fiddling here, you can see how it boosts things. And I usually leave that to the end of my painting. So yeah, that's a walkthrough of my layered paintings. And unless there's any other questions about this one, I'm going to move on to like the live painting demo. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go from something like this to hopefully something like this. So this is a whooping crane. And I picked this because I really like the head over here. Like it's got this like really bright red and then got this like contrasting black here. And also I just really like birds. But anyways, so if I were to start with the color palette, so like I said, it does have this like red crown. So I'm just gonna start with like pretty saturated red. Starting with a lot of red today. And then, like I said, there's this contrasting black here. I don't usually like making things like pure black or pure white. There's like an opportunity here to just like pick a really desaturated and dark complement of something. So I think I'm gonna go with like a teal thing. Just go like super dark over here maybe, and not very saturated at all. Actually, that's maybe a little too dark. And then it's also got a yellow beak. Maybe something like this. And then I think just to add a bit of interest to the beak, I'm just gonna make like this brown color over here, just to like complete that like analogous triad. And then just to like complement this, I'm gonna have like a really, I think a desaturated blue would be nice in the background. So I'm gonna go maybe a mid-tone. So something like this. And then just to like complete this, maybe I'll have like a bit of something like this is a pretty good palette to start with, I think. Okay, so like I said, I like to start with the background. So I've already got this like radial background, whoops, from my color palette. Just gonna go in like this. I do want to emphasize the head, so I'll have the lightest part here. And then you can just like go in and start like color picking from your palette as well as from the background, just to make things a little like less regular, I guess. But again, you can go back and tweak this if you want. And then now I can start deciding what color I want to shade with. So I think I'm going to shade with like a blue-green. So I'm going to go up here, adjustment, hue, saturation, make this, actually I'm going to, sometimes I like to just like bump up the saturation to 100 first, so I can see what color I'm working with before I turn down the saturation again. I think I like this. And then I'm just going to make it a little less opaque. So something like that. I already have the base colors here because no one wants to watch me like really slowly fill in base color. So here we are, and I'm going to start shading now. So put a layer on top and create a clipping mask and set this to multiply. So when I start shading, I always like to just block in the rough shadows first with this like really like hard edged brush, because if you do this, then it's easier just to keep the shadow shapes in mind, like the main shadow shapes, the primary shapes, before you go in with your details. Because a lot of the times when I'm shading just with like a softer brush, then I'll get too caught up in the details, and then I'll look back and I'm like, I didn't actually capture like the main shading at all. It's just like too much detail and like too washed out. So I like to just start like rough like really harsh shadows right away, because it's a lot easier for me to soften the shadows afterwards. So I'm switching to a softer brush now, so I can soften the shadows. It's a lot easier for me to soften them afterwards than it is to like make them more harsh after. Wait, I think I accidentally changed my color somehow. Okay. All right, that's my first layer of shading. And then I keep going until I'm satisfied with how dark it is. I think for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to go like 2 layers so you guys can see what I mean. So once again, I'm just going in with like the hard edged brush just to establish the the basic color shape, the basic, sorry, shading shapes. And at this point, I might step back and be like, oh, the shading is turning out a lot more green than I would like. So I can just, whoopsies. So I can just go adjust the hue saturation again. And
Brittany, we have a question in the chat
Sure, yeah.
from Paul Kelly.
Mhm.
He said, looks like you use a 40% flow brush a lot. Is there any reason why you prefer low flow versus low opacity?
With opacity, here, let me just make a new layer. So with 40% flow, then it looks like this, right? And what I like about flow as opposed to opacity is if you keep going over it and pressing down hard, you can still reach 100% opacity anyways. Meanwhile, if I set it to 100% flow and I set it to 40% opacity, actually, I'm gonna just pick another color just to make it clear, then like, no matter how hard I press, I'm pressing really hard right now, then it won't go more than 40%. So I find this a lot more intuitive to like work with low flow rather than low opacity. Like with low opacity, you'll have to go over many times before you hit 100%.
Thank you.
Okay, just gonna go back there. Right. Yeah, so what I just did was I used hue saturation to put it more towards like a blue shading color because I felt like this crane was getting a bit too green. In fact, I might do this over here as well. Maybe I want it like a little bit lighter, just a little bit more blue. And I can toggle the preview on and off just to compare it with how it was before. And I do like this better, so I'm going to keep that. All right, so after I've done however many multiply layers that I want, that's when I'll move on to my highlighting layers, which is usually overlay. And with overlay, since I find highlights are usually more subtle than shading, I usually start right away with a soft brush. And then the highlights are like, in this case, it would be yellow. So I just color pick from my palette here and just like start brushing away. So I find the highlighting portion is like a nice stage to start like adding a bit more saturation to your image. Like when you're shading with multiply layers, you're inevitably going to lose saturation. So I find these like overlay layers are a great chance to bring them back a little bit. I feel like the highlighting is a bit too yellow because I can still like build them up and like move towards that yellow. So I'm going to make it like a little orange and not so saturated. Right. And then for my next layer, I'm going to make it more yellow. All right. Pretty happy with the highlighting, and after I'm done shading and highlighting, then I can start adjusting the colors. So right now I feel like this red is just like over here in the head and it's a little bit distracting. You could argue that like this is what you do want emphasized, but then like it's still going to stick out a little bit. So it would be nice to just have like a subtle bit of red elsewhere. Just like I'm really lightly brushing right now, just to, like bring out a bit of red in other areas. This is still probably too harsh, so once again, I'm going to go in with like my hue saturation just to change that up a little bit. You can see there's a lot of fiddling to go with this. turn that down a little bit more actually. Yeah, so after I'm happy with my underpainting, that's when I can start painting on top of my raw sketch. Just gonna go in with a bit more overlay. Maybe use this color. This is where I can start integrating the subject more with the background, because like I'm not clipped onto the body anymore. So if you can see here, that could be a little lighter. You can see here that like what I'm painting is affecting the background as well. You can get some sort of like light bloom effect here. That would be nice. Put some here as well. Yep. And I'm gonna use a. Now let's say that like it's bothering me a little bit that like the shading here moves a bit more towards blue, but then over here it starts moving back towards green. And let's say I want to change that to blue again. I set this layer style to color. So I'm gonna just bump up the saturation so you guys can see what's happening. But you can see that like this color layer is just like completely transforming the colors underneath to just this blue that I've selected here. So it can be pretty easy to overdo it with the color layer, but that's okay because that's what opacity is for. So I'm probably just going to use this subtle blue here. Actually, I'm just going to make it a bit more saturated. Yep. And then something I like to do is I like to add like a strong backlight, which a strong color backlight, which might not be like super realistic, but it looks nice when it comes to painting, especially if you're just doing it for your own enjoyment. That's what matters. So yeah, I selected this blue color. This is just, oh yeah, I'm going to set it to overlay. Yeah, so this would probably be my underpainting, over which I would make a new normal layer and just start going in with the details, which even though I would say is 20% of the process, it probably takes like 50% of the time. But this is where I would just start color picking directly from the painting. I'm not introducing any more colors. So you can see that I basically just use layer styles to shade everything. And because layer styles affect everything like in a certain way, then it's easy to maintain cohesion by using layer styles. Let's see if I want the light. Yeah, so I just keep painting like this. And that's about it for this demo, honestly. Yeah, let's say like I'm happy with this painting. I would go down here and maybe make a curves layer, just kind of like boost the contrast a little, make it darker like that. And yeah, that's pretty much my painting process. So if anyone has any questions, or if they want me to go over anything again in case I was going too fast, then that's about it for today.
We do have a few questions that came in. I do
Sure.
also just want to say this is beautiful, which is a lot of the comments coming in as well. Just love it,
Thank
beautiful,
you.
etc. I feel like you illustrated some very big brain moves with Photoshop that my mind is still wrapping around. Two questions we got that are sort of connected, one from Ariel and one from Carmen. Ariel was wondering if you've considered making a living with your artworks, and if you have any website where she could reach out for commissions. And Carmen was interested if you have socials where you can she can find and follow your work and all that fun stuff.
Unfortunately, I'm one of those people that likes to remain hidden, so I don't like paint things for my own enjoyment, and then I don't post them anywhere because I'm really shy. So I don't actually have anywhere to like follow. Um, yeah. And I'm also really busy right now, so I don't know if I can take commissions, but
That
I
is
can
a-okay.
I can perhaps like give my email if anyone is really, really interested. It's just like it would not be happening for a couple months. But yeah, I'm flattered that there are people who are interested, I guess.
Folks have been saying that that is a-okay. I would agree with them. And if that is something you want to do, we can work that out after. But I think thank you so much for sharing this for us. And it's been incredible to see all of the lovely comments as well coming in from folks who I think are very pleased as well.
Thank you. All right.
If there are any other questions, now is the perfect time to ask. We'll leave the chat and the call up for a few more minutes, and then we'll wrap up if there is nothing else. No more questions, mostly just supportive messaging from Colleen
Words
and
of
other people.
encouragement, yes.
Paul does have one question, which is some of your other favorite artists. I know you showed us the one at the beginning, but is there anybody else who's particularly inspiring?
Oh, I don't have any examples on me right now, but you may, like why you, actually, I'm just gonna put that in the chat. Yeah, this artist I find really inspiring. Like she does a lot of like environmental pieces, like, and there's like a lot of like flowiness in her art that I really like. That's something else it would be nice to give a talk on, honestly, I think. And she also uses color really, really well. So wait, I didn't put that in the chat, did I? I accidentally messaged someone. Anyways, yes, that's how you spell her username. And I would also encourage people to check out her work. It's really beautiful.
All right, thank you so much, Brittany. And thank you everyone else for attending as well. Julia, keep me honest if I'm forgetting anything, but I think the big takeaway is that we do have one BM class left. We have our Blender 201 session running tomorrow, which will wrap up a week of what I think have been wildly successful workshops. I'm very happy that so many people have come to enjoy them. We'll be in touch with the recordings within the next 2 weeks. So stay tuned to the BMCAA socials for all that fun stuff. And we'll be wrapping up the BMC 75 celebrations over the next week as well. So please join us for our trivia night and also our gala when we sort of celebrate the culmination of what has been an incredible month. So thank you, everyone.
Oh, and one small thing, we will follow up with you all by email. I know that there was some brushes that Brittany said that she would be willing to share, so we can follow up in an email with those, as well as we have a bit of a survey. If you guys liked the presentation, it would be great to get some feedback from you so that we can keep doing more of these events and make them even better the next time we do them. So keep your eyes out for another email from us to that effect. That's it. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming.